Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Mama Project podcast. I have an interview today with a fellow pregnancy and postpartum athleticism coach, Lauren Mullikin. Lauren, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So, of course, we're going to talk about motherhood, and we're really going to get into the mental side of motherhood, which I am so excited to chat about because, as I was saying to Lauren before I hit record, is that I knew my life was going to change when I became a mother, but I guess I just didn't realize how much it would change and how quickly. So, Lauren, before we get into the topic, give us a little bio of like who you were before you had kids.
Sure. Before I had kids, I was a mental performance coach. I worked with the endurance athletes and I worked with the military and with kids with disabilities in residential setting. And so I did a lot of work on performance enhancement, both in athletics, on the job, like it's more than both, and in daily life. So I was very active in exercising and running and all those things, very A type. And then I had kids.
So talk to us about what were you doing exactly leading up to your son is 11. So 11 years ago, were you working up until you had him? Like what did your career trajectory look like? Were you planning on taking time off? Like what was your plan going into having your first, and then what was your reality?
Well, I was working full time. My husband's a massage therapist. And so since we both had like our own businesses that we would have been doing, we had the idea of whoever found a spot to work out of first, the other had to move there. Like I'm from the Chicago suburbs and he's from like near Purdue University in Indiana. And so it was whoever found a spot first, then the other had to move. So he won and I had to move and get the full-time job. So I was planning on, we actually were planning on moving back to California where we went to school and I was going to start working there. But then we found out I was pregnant. So I was going to continue to work full time and he was going to go stay with my mother in law at our house and just continue on with life fitting in a kid around what we were already doing, as that works so well for everyone. About 11 months in, I realized this isn't working for me. I'm carrying 3 bags to nurse it at work, and then I'm nursing at home. My oldest was born 5 weeks early. He was very healthy, but he's still a little scrawny guy and had colic and reflux. And so I'd have to bring multiple changes of clothes everywhere I went to. And so it just got too torn in different directions, and I decided I was going to stay home. My husband will never let me live it down. I wrote and draw a erase marker on our bathroom mirror the finances as to why I thought that we could survive on just his income and I could stay home. And so he didn't agree with me, but we made it work. And so I just kind of ebbed and flowed with different things, consulting here and there, and teaching boxing classes and in and out of fitness things after that. So then
So
kind of
what did your fitness look like during that season, like pregnancy? So 11 years ago, I can imagine there was like no information back then. There's a lot of information now, but still a lot of misinformation, I guess. We're getting there. There's a lot more awareness, but what was it like back then in terms of what did you do during your pregnancy, and then how was postpartum for you?
we were very much in the whole keep doing what you were doing camp with my OB. And so since I was already active, I was running, jumping, boxing, all the things throughout the pregnancy. And my goal was just to stay as fit as possible, stay as active as possible, because I knew that once I delivered, I would have to take some time off. What that looked like, I had no idea. Didn't even know about taking like some time to work on breathing. I was very much in a perfectionist A type athlete mindset at the time. And I treated it like I was running a marathon, like I was preparing through pregnancy for a marathon. I had like in this trimester, I could do this, and then I can do this. And I had like imagery practices and refocusing and all of the mental stuff that I normally would do with a client, I was doing for myself. And then I went into labor when I was at a football game and it was 5 weeks early. And so I'm like, nope, this isn't time. I'm not ready. I had gotten in a car accident at 29 weeks. And so I had already maxed out on my unexpected things that could happen. I was okay, but I had to go through physical therapy and occupational therapy for the rest of the trimester. Um, and yeah, so then I went into labor and went and had him, and then he was in the NICU for 9 days and my world just kind of flipped upside down. And so I kind of was living in the, how do I just function? I was okay after, and I got cleared to work out at the usual postpartum check, no issues. My OB knew how active I was, so she was way more laid back than I think I needed at the time. And she said, "No, you're good to go." And I'd ask questions, but I didn't know the right ones to ask. And so, from her standpoint, being from the medical standpoint, I had no risks in that capacity. And so she cleared me to go. So what did I do? I decided I was going to get back into shape, bounce back by training for a sprint triathlon that I did 4 months postpartum.
And you didn't, I mean, as far as you could remember, you didn't have any issues returning to fitness too soon, like, or did you? And like, you just kind of ignored it, like, any pelvic pain, any incontinence, any low back pain, things like that? Or did you just, you kind of just jumped right back into what you were doing with no issues?
I jumped back into it. I think the only issues was I was still in OT from the car accident, and they put it on pause, and I went back and got assessed there. But that was mostly just learning how to sit at my desk at work. And I didn't have any leaking. I hadn't even heard about prolapse or anything yet at that point in time. But if there was anything going on, I would have probably ignored it and decided that it was unrelated because I had a goal and I was going to work towards that.
Now, what I know you said you went back to work after your son then. How soon
Yes.
after having him did you go back to work? And what were
I
you
went
doing at the time?
12 weeks. I went back, and that was when I was in the residential center. So I had jumped back into my full caseload again, had like 13,000 emails to work through, and just kind of got right back into the flow of things. Only thing that really changed is instead of staying over at the end of the day, I knew I had to get back to relieve my mother-in-law. So my end time was a little sooner, and sometimes that meant I got in a little bit earlier. And then I would go and work out on my way home if she was okay with it, or go to the grocery store. But it was still powering through everything, and kind of like sticking my fingers in my ear and ignoring like all the signs that things were not heading in the best direction. And just kept working out, kept going, and convinced myself that, oh, if I walk the 5K, then it doesn't matter. I'm not running full force. So, or I'm not doing brick workouts. I'm only going to do one of the two today. And so that was how I rationalized that I was easing my way back into things.
Now, as far as, motherhood and going back to work, did you struggle going back to work so early? Because I feel like 12 weeks is I know it's standard in this country, but it is pretty early with nursing. I feel like you kind of just get in the groove of things at 3 months and then you go back to work. And did you think it would be easier than it actually was? Like, talk about the more of the mental side of things that you struggled with until you decided to stay home.
Um, so with that one, it was getting back into it wasn't a problem. The things that were hard were like I would nurse, I had my routine, like I would go and work out in the morning. For this, I do my swim in the morning, come back, nurse him, get ready, and then go. But he would spit up on me. And so then I would have to stop and go change. And so then I had to rearrange my plan that I had about what I was going to be bringing with me. Or there were a couple times that I forgot some of my stuff that I needed for work. I forgot my lunch and you couldn't go without eating. I was nursing. And so I had to have food. And so having all the bags to pack and unpack and carry with every day, um, that was just very tedious. And I mean, multiple bags. I'm just like trying to get through doors alone were a pain. Getting the kids that were on my caseload to acknowledge that I wasn't going above and beyond at the same capacity that I had previously was really challenging. Honestly, that was probably the part that I was least prepared for is when I was setting what I now know to be healthy boundaries. I didn't know that's what I was doing at the time, but when I'm setting healthy boundaries with the kids that I worked with, then sometimes, I mean, these kids could be very aggressive. They had no family. And so I was the closest to family that some of them had. And so they felt abandoned, and I'd have to readdress how we worked through things and be stopping out the door and have to firmly say, I'm sorry, I have to go. You have to stay with this other person. And that was really the beginning of the end of full time, as it was just crushing because I couldn't be as focused at work as I had been previously. And I had to make sure that I pumped regularly because the second or third week that I was back, I got double mastitis and had the only fever that I've had in like close to 30 years. And that was just excruciatingly painful. So like you said, we go back too soon here in the States, and that was really the testament to it. I produced plenty of milk and then I had too much. And so I think I went 3 hours instead of an hour and a half, and that was enough.
Wow. Okay. So struggling with all those things that year, and then you finally decided you had enough, and your husband was on board. So what did it look like after that point for you as far as staying at home, fitness, taking care of your son full time? Walk us through what it looked like after that.
I started running 8-week fitness boxing classes and started finding ways to keep the mental side of things engaged with fitness. And so I had it as a long-term goal to become a personal trainer just because it was something I wanted to do, which that didn't come until way later. Instead, I didn't have the time to focus on studying. So I joined a mom's group and I made some really great friends and realized quickly that all the friends that I had at work no longer really talked to me because they were all still going out and none of them were having kids. Only a few of them were married. And so I kind of felt very alone. Thankfully, I found that group of moms because that helped a whole bunch. But I would do these boxing classes and then we would talk through like attentional shifting and like where to focus your attention to be able to have energy at the end of the day, or how do you let go of overwhelming stress, and instead of the idea of like just go punch it really hard out, it was how do you release it so that you're getting the energy out with boxing, but it's within your control and it's cathartic instead of, oh my gosh, I just punched that so hard that now my shoulders hurt or my hips are fatigued for the day. So there's a lot of that sort of stuff that I did. I taught Pilates a couple times a week, and then just like dabble here and there with different things. Pretty sure that I made a sourdough starter at somewhere like well before pandemic times, and just would like make money here and there with that to try to negotiate with being with the kids or being home with my son. And then we had these activities with the kids that my new friends had 2-3 times a week. And eventually I ended up getting on the board of that. And because I was bored. I mean, it wasn't that I was bored. There was so much going on, but it was not structured. And that was really, really hard to have that unstructured time of being home. Like I loved being with my son, but there was no consistency to my day. And even with my workouts, they were fitting it around him and when I could get into childcare and things like that.
Yeah, so when did you fit in work like as a, full-time mom who wants to still have something for herself? Like did you have support? Does like you have your mother-in-law still help? Did you get stuff done during nap times? Like what did you how did you do that work around?
I honestly don't even remember that much from that time because it was like trial and error. There, every day was a little different. My mother-in-law did not continue to help. We didn't have any babysitters. Periodically, I would, when he got a little bit older, I would leave him at um, the studio with my husband when he had clients. But oh, I would drop him off at my friend's house. Like I would just see who was going to be home that day and drop him off and then go to something else. And
Mm-hmm.
so, like eventually that lasted for a little over a year. And then my old boss had gone on maternity leave. And so she asked if I could cover part time while she was on leave. So I went back to my old job for 3 months and covered that to while I was working everything else. And then 5 months after that, I had this job that was like my dream job at the time. And that was working at Fort Carson in Colorado with the Army. So it was like one of the places we wanted to live in a job that was full time in the mental performance space. And then we were going to have to relocate. But my husband and son stayed behind for 4 months, and I would fly back from Colorado to Indiana like every 3 to 5 weeks on the weekend, and then go back and work. And thankfully, I was a mental performance and resilience coach because I needed a lot of resilience at that time, both being away from my son for the better part of 4 months when he was 2, um, and like moving everything. I moved the dogs in one trip. I moved, like, took a U-Haul another trip. And so I had to stay focused on working and then continue to keep moving people along. So I had to really practice the stuff that I was using at work. And I had colleagues at that time. So it was nice to have some people to bounce ideas off of and say, like, what am I missing? What can I do differently? I'm doing too much. How do I do less?
So how long did that last until I know you said you had your daughter? She's 6 now, so they're 5 years apart. So how long did that last until you all decided to have another one?
I wanted to have a second one well before I got the job with the Army, but my husband wanted to wait. And I tend to be one with all the big ideas and like say, hey, let's do this. And he says, okay. And so I tried to balance and like give him some space and not push too far on that since we both need to be on board with having kids. And so when we were out in Colorado, he had been there for 4 or 5 months at that point in time. So it was about 8 months after we moved. And I was like, okay, I'm in a good flow here, but we don't have any family here. And one of the big things is when I went back to work, like I loved my job so much. It was so much fun. I was working with like, I got to get Army combative trained and like I would do the mental training with them. And so we would be on the ground and teaching how to do some energy management techniques and how to practice your breathing. So well before I figured out the breathing for pregnancy and postpartum, this was a regular part of what I was doing with the infantrymen that were training for the expert infantryman badge to see if they could get that and like all these different things within the Army. My boss had been a retired Green Beret, and so we used a lot of that breath control work over there and seeing how you could regulate your nervous system and like kind of shift the balance, how you can use it when you're sleep deprived, because work with companies that would have to go 4 days without sleep and practice sleep deprivation. So I would have to work with them on how do you prepare yourself for these times so that you can retain as much cognitive control as you can. So you basically, so your brain doesn't go to mush and you can like function and put one foot in front of the other and like get your hand to your mouth when you're trying to eat without like just collapsing and falling asleep. So that was a ton of fun, but I realized, all right, now I'm getting near the end. I wanted to be done having kids by the time I was 35. I was quickly approaching there. So we had to have a conversation about what we were going to do. Like, are we going to have another one or are we going to call it? Because we both had really wanted to have a second one, but we were loving what we were doing at that time. And my son was at a fun age there at 3, 4 years old. He was getting independent, but also not having the emotional roller coaster that comes when they get towards school age. And so it's just a nice little happy in between past the 2 and 3 phase. Um, and so we decided that unless I could get a raise, that it wouldn't be feasible for childcare to stay in that position. And so I tried to get a raise, and then they denied it. And even though I pointed out that the guys that I was working with were getting paid more than I was, I got some coaching and tried to advocate to get what I deserved, and like, just get on par, with those guys. And they just said, no, military life stuff is out of our hands. And so I had to walk away, and I decided, okay, well, if I can't have that, I can't afford to have another kid, and we won't have another kid. So we moved back to the Midwest. Thankfully, we did not sell our house. We rented it out while we were gone. So we moved right back into the house that we had moved from about a year and a half after we left. So it was a very condensed time that had a lot going on. But like, I was in that time too, I was running more regularly. I was doing the combatives training in the mornings. I was teaching kickboxing classes at a gym. And so just incredibly active, hiking all the time, doing all the things, was in fantastic shape. And so I thought, okay, I'm in a good position. We can come back, we can get settled, we can start trying to have a kid. But we had to kind of start fresh because my husband he had put his clients into different therapist hands, and he did not want to go and tell anybody that he was back. He wanted it to naturally happen so that he wasn't stepping on anyone's toes, and being respectful of that, which I mean, I appreciate, but it annoyed me at the time because when we did the math, I had to stay home again. So to cover childcare and all that, I was going to have to stay home again and find new ways to earn money. So just kept pivoting and shifting, and went back to the moms group I was in. And then that's when I added TRX and bar into the mix. So I was 5 months pregnant with my daughter when I got certified in TRX. And then I was 8 months pregnant when I went through the bar training. Now with that pregnancy, I had so much pelvic pain. I had started physical therapy 12 weeks. I was kickboxing at the time, and still kicking at people's head because we were still 7 years ago, still under the mindset of keep doing what you'd been doing. Although now I knew what a pelvic floor was, and I had heard of the word prolapse, and was still not leaking, but I learned like just incredibly sharp pain, and I couldn't get in and out of the car. Standing on one leg was so painful. And so I started seeing physical therapists and just kind of talking to a lot of them and learning how to adapt and how to keep exercising. Because my OB, who was the same one that I had for my son, was still like, oh, you're in great shape, you're active, like you know what you're doing, you're good. And I'm like, but I hurt. What do I do? She's like, it'll get better after you deliver. The pubic symphysis pain doesn't continue on afterwards. So.
As you were talking about that, I was like, it sounds like SPD. So talk about we're getting to the point where you start working with moms. This is what what it leads to, right? So what about your experience with your daughter, not only during pregnancy and developing this pelvic pain, but postpartum is really, I think, what forced you into starting to work with moms more seriously. So talk about that.
Yeah. So on top of having the SPD, I started having a little bit of, I don't know, just my muscles in general were having a really hard time. I was having like all the aches and pains. But what was odd is I would go into Braxton Hicks for like 24 hours once a month from 20 weeks on until the end. So I would have contractions consistently every 3 to 5 minutes for over 24 hours. And so I'd have to go to the doctor, and we would joke that like, I'm going to stop going in to get checked out because I know that nothing's happening, but nobody had any answers into why that was going on. I was still cleared to keep exercising because we were starting to learn then that like they were starting to move away from bed rest at that time, and realizing that movement is better than not moving. Just weren't sure about the lifting part. So they were starting to move to figure out, like, do you have to cut back on how much you lift? Do you not? Like, well, I'm just going to keep doing my thing because I'm finding no research that tells me not to. And why would it change from the last time? So I started searching for like any information that I could get. I was picking the physical therapist's brain as much as possible. She was actually going through pelvic floor physical therapy training at the time. So she wasn't actually a pelvic floor physical therapist yet, but she was going through the training. We didn't have anybody. I later learned we had one person in town, but I hadn't heard of her yet, or she was in a different network, something like that. And so I just was like, this is mind blowing. I'm educated. I know what I'm looking for. I'm actively trying to seek this out. And I can't find this anywhere. Like, this is crazy. And so I just started talking to people and asking questions and hearing what they knew, what their thoughts were, what they were being told. And like, this is wild. How is this reality? So I got through the pregnancy, went full term with her. She was delivered pretty smoothly with that. And yes, the SPD pain went away as soon as she was delivered. But then I had what I later found out was some prolapse, but my doctor brushed it off. And even like to this day, she still says like, it's fine, it's within normal limits, but it can be symptomatic. And what I found out later on after meeting with that same pelvic floor physical therapist again, early on, and then another one like a year later, is it was a lot of hypertonic pelvic floor. And so I discovered from talking with people that a lot of people sounded like they had the same issues going on, where it wasn't like they did their Kegels all the time, because that everyone was just told Kegel, Kegel, Kegel. You can keep doing what you're doing, but make sure you're doing your Kegels. And so that they just like followed blindly into these suggestions because nobody knew how to question differently. We didn't have any reason to, or any other information around that. So I had found originally, I found Girls Gone Strong like as a group. And I went through like they had like a mom group that I was getting some support on and learning a little bit more about that. And I decided, okay, now's the time for me to finally get that personal training certification. So I got certified in personal training. I started collecting various pregnancy and postpartum certifications before I found recertification. And that took me a while longer because I was guessing and checking and using the sports psychology stuff with this other general pregnancy and postpartum things. And so it was like piecemealing everything together in, this is great, this works well, but this only works well for these people and it doesn't work over for here. And like, it didn't connect right with me. And like I said earlier, I got cleared. I don't even think I was 4 weeks postpartum when I got cleared. And I left and went and started working out that day. And I mean, like I was doing like body pump and like body combat and like all these high intensity pound workouts, all this stuff that's way more intense that I should have been doing. But when I ran, I didn't leak. So I thought, okay, obviously I'm cleared, because that was my meter at the time. Was I had the strength, I'm physically able to do it. I knew how to adjust my nutrition and I was doing that. And then if I ran and I didn't leak, then I was good.
So after your experience with your daughter, how did you start helping moms? Like when did you realize that, this was a thing that other moms needed help with?
She was 10, almost 11 months old when I formally started doing this. All throughout this, I was doing the mental stuff because I already had the mental side of it. And I was just kind of talking with people and saying, it doesn't have to be this way. And like, what are you doing? What do you like? What don't you like? How can we take the things that you enjoy and get more of that? And so it was very subtly working in the stuff that I would have done with my mental performance if I was actually consulting with people, that I was fitting it into conversations and just kind of cueing what we were doing. I gave a couple talks at the moms groups that I was in. And then when I finally went through the first pregnancy and postpartum certification, I was like, okay, now I'm confident enough that I can combine these two together. And I started meeting with started with some of my friends that were pregnant or early postpartum and just started saying like, hey, I've got this thing that's going on. Who wants to try this out? I was still teaching the boxing classes. And so some people wanted to go from there, but it was adding in the training element in taking a pelvic floor focus at the time. So it started with like, we're going to focus on the pelvic floor. And then while I did that, we'd talk through a lot of imagery and getting to know, like improving body awareness is a lot of what it comes down to. And it's evolved over the last nearly 6 years, but it's always been that like mind body thing, but more of an athlete side. Not saying that yoga is not, but instead of like the gentle yoga-esque one, it's more of like the lifting and running and sports, like taking mindfulness and into that realm. Like I've always taught mindfulness as like, let's go do walking meditations, or that's how I got into Pilates in the first place. Is I just the stillness of it didn't sit right. I needed to move. And so I was like, surely you can combine these things. And so that was where it evolved with the moms is what are you doing? What do you want to be doing? And what can you actually do right now? And so I would go to some of their houses. Sometimes they would come to my house. We'd meet in parks and I'd bring my kids along with me. And sometimes I would like have a friend that would hang out with the kids while I taught some of the stuff. And so we just kind of were fitting it in as the best we can. And then I realized the more that I was fitting it in for myself, the best that I could, and like teaching what I could, where I could, that just kind of evolved and seemed like, hey, this is actually a thing that would make more sense for more people. Of you don't have to go and work out. And like we were starting to learn about how important lifting was. And that was still a scary thing for a lot of people, like moving from anything beyond like Pilates or a body pump was kind of scary for a lot of people. And so we'd ease into it and I would say, oh, we're just going to do some postpartum exercises. And so then we'd have them doing like teaching glute bridges and adding squats and stuff. And so instead of taking these moms that had no idea that like they used to be athletes, a lot of them used to be athletes in high school or college and then just moved away from it. And so they didn't think that was something they could do moving forward. Then we would go and look at like, oh, can you do 10 squats when you're at the stove? We'd hold on to the counter and work on doing some deep squats with some breath work and just fitting in exercise into the day. How can you hinge when you're putting your kid into the bathtub? So it was a lot more creative for the ones that were not making it to the gym. So I had started thinking I was going to work with athletes and with moms that were going to the gym regularly, but what I ended up working with is those that wanted to and just weren't able to at the time.
Let's talk about that. Let's unpack that part of it because I think that, I think social media and society in general puts like a really unrealistic expectation on what fitness needs to look like, right? I mean, and for you and me who were like athletes, always in the gym, always, training for something, this and that, like that becomes really hard when you become a mom, right? Like you don't always have gyms that are local that have childcare, or maybe you're not comfortable with it or whatnot. So what do moms that like you work with from in the mental side of things, what do they struggle with the most, at least like, early on with fitting in fitness and mom life, and like from a mental side of things, like what do they struggle with the most? Like what common themes do you see?
I think the biggest one is shoulding on themselves. I should be doing this. I should be doing this. And like that feeling like they're supposed to be doing it a certain way. And then along with that is the feeling of failure. I'm failing at this. If I shift and I help over here, then I'm failing at this other thing I moved away from. And so if they're working, they're failing at home. If they stay home, they're failing their career. And then all of these other like all of these feelings of failures or not living up to it. And then all of it's magnified with social media and having highlight reels in front of our faces 24/7. and those comparisons, it's just like that comparison really gets a lot of moms down because they're sleep deprived. They're probably not eating very well. If you have other kids like that, each new kid is a whole new ball game. It's like completely different. Anything you knew before is thrown out the window. And even anything you knew before for the kids you already have, once you bring another one home, that's an entirely new dynamic. And so there's a lot of like those elements of like you mentioned in the beginning, like it's so different than what you think it was. You think you know what's going to happen, and then it happens, and you're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. I was as prepared as I knew how to, and I still know nothing. So recognizing that it's okay to not know, we don't have to have all the answers. And once you realize that it's okay to not have the answers and just exist, it gets easier to let go of those shoulds and figure out what you want to do and what's right for you and your family.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful. At least I know for me in my experience, I was always like a go-getter in my career. I was always, trying to like start a new business or get more clients or whatever. And then I sold my gym and became a mom, and I was with her, and then I felt like that I should be doing more. So like you're right. Like I think that no matter what we do, if we just stay at home, we feel guilty about not making an income, or if we work, we feel guilty that we're not home more. Like it's just hard. Like there's guilt either way. So like how do you get over that guilt? Or how do you help moms get over that guilt?
Well, presently, it's been an evolution, but the way that I'm doing that presently is a lot of, instead of goal setting, I used to be a big goal setter. Everything was setting goals, short-term goals, having process, outcome, performance goals, like having different types so that you knew what was in your control, what was out of your control. But what I found is that doesn't really work as well. And now, like everyone pretty much has heard of SMART goals, or most people have heard of SMART goals, but I've learned that those actually make it worse for a lot of moms, particularly those that are more like this, that are very driven and know what they want. Because once you hit a roadblock, even if you know how to adapt and like recognize this is the time where I have to do something different, eventually you hit a point where you're either approaching burnout or just something doesn't sit right, and you know you need to do different but don't know how to. And once you get to that point, then it's like, now what? So that can be that can lead to identity crisis and really, really big drops. That's where you see some of the depression, and it may have been anxiety leading up to it, and then just it's like the floor drops out from underneath you. So instead of focusing specifically on goals, adapting it to look like, still setting goals is fine, but looking more at what is within you and going more in the idea of like intrinsic motivation or internal motivation. And by looking at values and beliefs, that holds so much stronger in the long run. Because A, when you stop and you look at your values and beliefs, you can assess, now in this stage of life, what do I value? What do I believe in? What are the beliefs I'm living from? Like, so it kind of brings together your ideal and real self. And so you meet in the middle and see, like, who am I now? What matters to me? And what do I need to do to live more authentically from myself so that I feel better and I can raise my kids the way that I want to, without bringing any baggage, any generational traumas, and like all the things that we're learning more about now in the mental health field. How do you release those without having to dive into them? And if you have to dive into them, absolutely, therapists are phenomenal for that stuff. But in the space that I'm in, we're more of like the performance enhancement side of, you have maybe 5 minutes to yourself. You're lucky if you can go and pee without having somebody come in and sitting on your lap while you're going to the bathroom. So like, there's no time for yourself. You have to create it somehow. And the way you can do that first is by noticing what you value and what you believe in. Then once you decide what those are, then the second part of that is, how do you live from that more authentically? So to get through the first part, you might be having to look at like, oh, these, I don't actually value this. Like, these were some family values that were passed down to me, or this is some stuff that I learned from some kids that I grew up with, or a camp I went to one time. I had this one coach that taught me I had to do wind sprints for 20 minutes before every workout. Like, there's bizarre things that happened for a long time, and not going to detour into it, but I mean, like, there was no research on women in the 90s, like until the 90s. And so we were just an extraneous variable. There's everything that we function from was based on research for men that was just adapted to these tiny men that we know we are not. And so once you can recognize that we grew up with all this stuff that does not serve us now, and that we don't necessarily want to bring on to the next generation, then you can restart. Then you can start over and see what matters to you. And then when you decide that, it allows you the space to breathe and see what happens next.
Have you heard of matrescence before?
I
The
haven't.
term? Okay, so it is matrescence is basically like your evolving motherhood journey. And it's been compared to adolescence, in which adolescence is the becoming of an adult. So matrescence is the becoming of a mother. And the things that you're saying right now about like your values and belief system, that's a lot of what I did through like matrescence work, because you talked about identity crisis, and I think a lot of moms deal with that. I think a lot of moms who, had a career before kids, and then they have a child, and then it changes everything, and it shifts their perspective, and it shifts probably their values and their belief system. They start to think like, who am I now that I'm a mom? And I just think everything that you said is exactly what a lot goes through a lot of moms' heads, is like, working and being a mom and just balancing all of it. And, you know, there's a physical side too, right? Do you work with clients that struggle with body image and how their body has changed since having kids, and maybe like you said, they can't do a certain exercise they used to? So let's dive a little bit into that, because I know a lot of moms deal with that struggle too. Like, I thought I was going to bounce back and I didn't. Like, I'm 10 pounds heavier. I can't, just all of those things, because like, hello, like I'm I'm in that season of life, like, thinking that you're going to go back to a certain jean size, and it's just not happening for you.
Yeah, that is, like, I feel like no matter how much you logically know, you're going to go through that in some capacity. It's a mind-blowing experience. And so we do a lot of the imagery and stuff. So through pregnancy, I'll work with moms along the way. And in pregnancy, I do more of monthly check-ins as opposed to regular ongoing coaching. I mean, some of them I do meet with regularly, but it's expectation management. A lot of it is expectation management, but I just ask them the questions to assess where their expectations are and where they're coming from. So it always ties back to those values and beliefs, and does that still serve you? And even if it's one that you just 6 months ago went through the process, you're like, you know what, I thought I cared about that, and nope, now I don't. And that's okay. So we bring that into the body image stuff and seeing, like, what did you used to like to do? What feels good now? How do you connect with your body? So I use a lot of imagery and not in the, like, go and picture yourself out on a beach somewhere, that sort of thing, but it's like, listen to your body. So we know that proprioceptively we lose connection with our body. There's some research that shows you can get, like, your butt gets mom brain essentially. And so you lose your glute activation from that shift in the center of gravity. And so I kind of talk to us, there's a lot of education to it. So the ones I work with, on the physical side, we do the training or they go through some of my classes, then we will talk about what is the experience like for you and normalizing how different it is for everybody. So even in the group classes that I teach, I'll use those as educational moments to say, like, if you are reaching your arms overhead, what matters more is that you're keeping your ribs in line with your hips, and we're trying to keep those lats activated. You want to maintain that for as long as you can through the pregnancy. So if you notice that you're arching your back, or if you're noticing you're having some low back pain, if you're noticing that your legs hurt in different places, like how do you get your body on board with having a nice alignment that will help your nervous system to function better? And when your nervous system functions better, then you can think better, you can digest better, like everything moves better, and your posture and your alignment is in a good place for you. But what that looks like is different for everybody. So if you're comparing to anybody else, comparing to who you were before, your pelvis may have stretched out. I mean, well, they do, but it may have stayed forever stretched out. So you may weigh less, but be a higher jean size, and not because there's any change in your muscle, but because your pelvis has moved out, and maybe you need a larger size because you're wider through your hips, which is a normal part of becoming like a woman and going through that experience. So looking at what matters, and then stopping and questioning, like, why do you have to be a certain way? What is the purpose behind it? And I'm cautious to like ask why, because that can put people on the defense, but it's like, tell me more about what that experience is like for you. Talk to me about where this thought process comes from. And it just gives a chance to like pause and reflect. And so that's how I bring more of the mindfulness into it, is that intentional reflection. And that's also how I get women to take their full rest break. So when you get back into exercising and you want to power through, and you have maybe 30 minutes if you're lucky, a lot of the times, then you want to get an hour workout in 30 minutes. What do? You don't cut out reps, you cut out breaks. And those breaks are necessary because that's how you're going to build that strength. And a lot of people don't realize the value of rest periods. We as a culture do not value rest in general. And that is like the missing element, in my opinion, that really it will get people to thrive more, doing less more consistently. So less more consistently. And what does that mean for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so for me, I was just talking about this on my Instagram, I think earlier this week, about expectation management, right? So before having my daughter, if I couldn't work out for an hour, it didn't count. I was that person, like, I need the full hour. I need the full hour. My watch needs to say I've worked out for an hour or it doesn't count. And, then you become a mom and you're like you said, like, so it's adjusting those expectations. And now I know, like, exactly what you said. For me, showing up, 3, 4 days a week for 30 minutes is so much better than not showing up at all. Right. And I think, again, our society has a good way of giving us unrealistic expectations, like 2 days in the gym and, doing all these things and this and that. And moms can become like overwhelmed by it. And they're like, well, I don't have an hour. Like, I don't have an hour to give. And they just don't do it at all because there's that barrier to entry. And I think more moms, busy moms with multiple kids or that are working, need to realize that, like 20 minutes, 2 or 3 times a week is better than nothing at all.
Exactly. And consistency was so undervalued for so long. There's been so many fad diets and just go as hard as you can until you crash and burn. And like, it's been celebrated, burning ourselves out. And like in careers, that's a celebrated thing, but particularly with moms, burning the candles at both ends and running yourself into the ground. And it's like, oh, I don't know how you can do this. Like, because I need help and there's way too many demands. Oh, but you're doing it so well. No, do less. And so it's like joke that I'm on a mission to get people to do as little as humanly possible, because by doing, even if they think they've done less, do like 50% less than that. And then you're starting to get closer to where to go, which when you tell an athlete that, they're like, what are you talking about? Like, I swear, do this for this season. We do this for this short period of time. And the less you do, but you do well, then the sooner you'll be able to get back. And so there's the idea with the military, the slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And kind of pull that into it. You in this season, what matters most? That you are staying healthy. What happens if you run yourself into the ground? You're going to get sick. How are you going to be able to help your kids if you are sick? You're not. You're going to be grouchy. Then you're going to feel bad because you were not parenting the way that you want to. And then you're going to eat less, you're going to sleep less. And then there's insomnia, or there's like, no, let's normalize doing 5 minutes of exercise instead of having a glass of wine at the end of the day. Let's normalize going for a 3-minute walk instead of saying, well, I can't go to the gym, so I'm going to do nothing. What can you do? I mean, you can do 2 squats and you're better than you were the day before. And then what that allows is, it's not, I'm going to work out to get into a bikini body, or I'm going to lose the baby weight and then come back. And we know nutritionally, like if you are restricting, if you're in a restriction mindset or that black and white, all or nothing thinking, then you're more likely to rebound and gain more weight. And so if you lose weight and gain it back, with those restrictive diets, it's like 10% more weight at the end of the day than previously. And so we have like TV shows about extreme weight loss and people on 1,000-calorie diets. No, get enough protein. You normalize making sure that moms are getting the protein that they need. And if you can't focus on just the basics of sleeping, eating, drinking water, and moving your body, stick to that. You don't need to do all the extra stuff. You just need to feel confident that you know your body, you know what works well for you, and you can stay true to yourself throughout the process. And that's hard. That's really, really hard, especially when you add in the sleep deprivation and all the other stuff, and the fact that like every 3 months the kids are going through growth spurts, or their brains growing, and like there's just, anytime you feel like, okay, I finally got the hang of what I'm doing, they enter a new phase, and that will happen until the end of time. And the narrative of like, whoa, you got them for 18 years. No, you've gone forever. And then you get grandkids potentially, or if you're focusing on the kids all the time and not yourself, you're more likely to engage in the behaviors that you don't want to be doing. And you're more likely to be giving the attention to the things that are going to achieve what you're trying to avoid. So if like, I don't want to yell at my kids, but you're not making time to move your body, even if it's just stretching while you're waiting for some water to boil, just something that gets you moving is going to help your brain and your body feel better, move better, sleep better, and you're going to crave better food. So when you're in a rut, you're not feeling well, you're more likely to have mental health issues. And if you wait until the point that you need to go and see a therapist for mental health issues, that's going to take time because you have to relearn how to do the things that you could have just done well from the beginning. And so those 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, you can get a whole workout in throughout the course of the day. And maybe you're not going to get the time over tension benefits of breaking it apart. But if that's what you can do, then that's what you can do. And the more consistently you do that, the easier everything else will be in your day. And so the sooner you'll get into the ability to be able to have those 30 minutes consecutively. And the less likely you are to get hurt. And the more likely you are to notice when you have an ache in your foot that's maybe making you roll your ankle, and that like you're running out the door and roll your ankle stepping off a step and then you break your foot. So you're going to prevent all those injuries and all these issues that happen. And we don't know, like, I don't know what was going on. Well, what were you doing before then? Were you running yourself under the ground? Were you ignoring your body? It's giving you some cues, and slowing down in those couple minutes will just have exponential growth. And then when you're in your 80s, you're going to be able to be like throwing kids in the air and like chasing after grandkids or hiking on mountains and like doing all these active things later on in life because you made small incremental choices consistently through motherhood.
Absolutely. And I think, I don't know about for you. So when you were talking about putting pressure on us to like lose the baby weight and, being in a state of restriction and things like that, like I've really never subscribed to restriction. I've always fueled my body like being an athlete, but I did, however, think that I had a friend that got married in Mexico when I was 5 months postpartum. And so when I was pregnant, I was like, oh, like I'll have all the baby weight gone by then, because I could just wave a magic wand and like whatever. But I went through a really traumatic experience with my daughter, and I had a lot of complications, prolapse, things like that. So like that alone happening to me gave me more grace because I didn't lose the baby weight right away. I still haven't lost the baby weight. She's 19 months old and I still haven't, right? But it's like that traumatic thing happening to me. Not that this should have been the case, but that is what gave me grace to be like, no, like your body went through a lot. Like, I just want to feel better. Like, that was the first time in my life I had been through something so traumatic that affected my whole body that it was so much more important to me to feel better than to like look better. You know what I mean? Than to like look aesthetically the part. Because I had always been lean. I had always looked like an athlete. And for the first time, it was so much more important. Even now, functionally, I rather be able to pick her up and not have prolapse symptoms and do my workouts than be 10 pounds less. And I think that's a healthy and mature realization, but sometimes it takes moms longer and it doesn't take a traumatic event to understand that. Sometimes it just takes motherhood. So, the clients that you work with, are they stay-at-home moms? Are they working moms? Or do you have like combination? And do you see, are there different mental struggles either way, like for the working full-time working moms or the moms that stay home? What do you see with who you work with?
So I work with a combination and it ebbs and flows. I have more working moms than stay-at-home moms, but the the struggles are the same but different. And so it's the same types of struggles that look different, and it's hard to recognize that, like, where the similarities lie, because there's too much to do. There's not enough support, and we're still trying to power through and get all this stuff done with the goal of raising kids to become the humans that you want them to be and to be well adjusted and all the different things while keeping active and keeping up with what you need to be doing. So I actually find the working moms have an easier time working out, but that's because sometimes they've got childcare, and so childcare can be open a little bit later so they can go to work, whereas the stay-at-home moms have the idea that they have to constantly be on for their kids. And it's a lot harder to justify getting a babysitter or going and doing something other than going to a gym and putting them in the childcare there, which not everybody's comfortable with doing. And so then the struggle with the stay-at-home moms, I find, is releasing that expectation that they have to do it all. And for that, doing it all is doing it all for the kids and letting themselves be last. So on those ones, it's figuring out figuring out how to fit it in the day, and just having those strategies planned out ahead of time. And so like, if you want to work out, let's just start with one day. Don't say go to 3 days a week. If you're doing nothing, start with one day. And after you've got a day that you're going consistently for a month or two, then add more. And how long that is depends on how easy it feels relative to you. Like, if it feels doable and it feels like something you can maintain, if your kid gets sick, if you have to travel, if something else gets thrown in the way, if you can still come back and do that consistently, then that is kind of where we say the guideline is to add another one. And when you add on at that point, it can be adding another day, it can be adding another set. When I program stuff, I'll tell people, like, the number of reps this is the goal rep, but form matters more than getting them done. And if you find yourself trying to push through and do all of them because it's written down there, then we need to have a conversation and see, how do we need to write this out so that you will do what's best for your body and for you as a whole right now, as opposed to, I have to get through all these. Like, I get it. It was very much me. It was a very long process to learn that I can go and do one set when I was planning on doing 3, and then walk away and be done, instead of, well, I don't have enough time to do all of this and can't do anything. So that's what the stay-at-home moms, where the struggles are, is figuring out how to fit it in, how to keep it consistent, and then where you can fit it in. So you have the goal of going to the gym, or you have a gym space in your house, but what do you do if your kids are climbing all over you? How do you make that work? And so we talk through a lot of, like, what are the muscles you're trying to be working? What is the movement? What is the purpose behind the exercise? And so with them, I'm thinking a lot more of, how are you making this functional into your day? And if your kids are crying and you have to hold them, if you're trying to work your glutes, can you turn over and do something different? Like, what can you do differently? Can you hold them as the weight? Figuring out how to get creative into what you perceive, because you have multiple different jobs that you're doing all day long as the person at home. Whereas for the working moms, it's still similar struggles, but they can get to the gym and do the stuff. There, it's more of the mental side of, I feel like I should skip it because I'm missing this time with my kids, or I have this work stuff that I should stay late and do this. I need to get this done. Like, but if you're not taking care of yourself, if you're not making sure that this fits in your day, then you're not going to be useful to anybody. And so if you know that you've got a project and you're going to have to stay late at work, or you've got sports that you got to get to for your kids, or doctor's appointments you got to fit, whatever is going on, if you've got this other stuff that's going to prevent you from getting the workout that you would have normally been able to do, set a timer for yourself for 5 minutes an hour, or even a minute an hour, to do something to move your body. And then you can keep track of it if they're the type of person that wants to track it. But if tracking is going to be overwhelming, I get a lot of moms with ADHD. And so any form of tracking at all is just overwhelming and will derail the process altogether. And so it's like, well, if you need to write it down so you've got something you can look at, that's fine. But if not, go off of how you're feeling. It's totally fine to skip writing it down altogether at this stage. You'll get to a point eventually where you can be documenting and you can be writing down the weights. But if you're not training for something specific, it really doesn't matter that much if you're tracking how much weight you did from time to time. Go and put some weight on that seems heavy. Grab a band that's harder than you think it is. Try it out, see what happens. But go for, like, the heaviest thing that you think is doable at that time. And if you can get through all of them with ease, then the next set, add more. If it was a struggle, go back a little bit. And so finding ways to just kind of fit that in around your schedule with being at work, so that you can focus your attention on that little bit you're doing. Then you get home, and then when you're home, you're accomplished in what you wanted to do, because you've set the bar to look a little different, and then you can be fully present with the kids when you get home.
Absolutely. I love all that. Let's finish with one more question. So, what would be your best piece of advice for a first time mom?
Okay, first time mom. I think the best piece of advice would be to be cautiously prepared. And I don't know if that's exactly what I want to say, but it's be prepared, ask questions, but get to know yourself during that period. Know what you want ahead of time so that once everything changes, you're ready to just be okay with that. And so if you know how you do well in stressful situations, if you know where you tend to struggle, what kind of lies you tell yourself to make it seem okay, then that will help you be prepared for the everything that's going to go in a way that you've never thought possible. So nothing will work out how you have it planned. And so if it's a loose preparation and it's more focused on who you are as a person and what matters to you, then you can be more confident in yourself and you don't have to look to other people to give you all the answers. You can trust that you're going to be okay no matter what happens.
Absolutely. And just knowing that in motherhood, the only thing that's constant is change, right? It's like they're constantly changing, you're constantly changing, your schedule's constantly changing. And that's hard for a type A person, but it can be done. Well, Lauren, where can the community that listens to this podcast find you?
So I'm at Pure Fortitude on Instagram and Facebook. Currently, I'm not very active with it, but I'm working to get back into that. Or I have Pure Fortitude Moms Thriving Together on Facebook is a free group that I have that people can come and ask questions. We cover the mental stuff, the physical stuff, ask nutrition questions, and just it's a safe space that's judgment free to support each other because we are far better together. And I hope that we can normalize just talking about the tougher stuff that just gets ignored and we all look at each other like, yeah, we know this and
Hmm.
nobody's going to talk about it.
Yeah, I love that. That's why I love our community of P&PA coaches so much is just women like you who are like, yeah, I'll do a podcast and just talking about your unique experiences and how it's really molded what you're doing now. And I just think that that's so great. And yes, moms definitely need to know that there are safe spaces out there where they can ask the hard questions and get some answers because we have access to so much more information now. Luckily, with Bree's work and other women in her community, as far as mental health, physical health, and everything like that, pregnancy, postpartum, and beyond. So, Lauren, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for the work that you do.
Thanks for having me.